I didn't fall for him the day he spoke. I fell the day I realized I was already rearranging my future around a man who wasn't allowed to want me back. They said Dr. Adrian Vale was what happened when brilliance forgot to apologize. He entered Westfield University's old Gothic lecture hall like it had a pulse he could slow with one breath. The room, vaulted windows, dark wood, the lingering scent of chalk and rain, seemed to bow inward when he stood behind the lectern. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He began with a question that left the room suspended in a collective line. What do you owe the truth if it destroys the life you were promised? It wasn't a prompt pulled from a syllabus. It felt like a dare. I, Mara Stone, who loved syllabi and lists and the solace of getting A's, paused my pen mid-stroke. My heart didn't race, it recalibrated. He spoke about the Brontes like their books were blueprints for surviving a storm no one would admit was coming. He mapped longing to weather, how desire could be both shelter and hail, and when he looked up and asked, "Is the right thing the kind thing?" His eyes caught mine and did not flinch. It was a half second too long, just enough to register, not enough to claim. The kind of look that tells you you're not invisible and makes you wish you were. After class, I hovered with the other gravity-drunk bodies orbiting his desk, pretending I needed clarification about participles in a sentence I'd already diagrammed twice. He capped his fountain pen, glanced up, and said, "Mara." My name sounded like a verdict and a secret in his mouth. "Your analysis on the shifting narrator, why did you choose to call it a confession?" he asked. "Because it felt unavoidable," I said, like the story wanted to tell on itself. He smiled in a way that folded and refolded itself into restraint. "That's accurate. And also braver than you think to say out loud." I told myself I only stayed late 3 more times because I was hungry for craft, for theory. But the fourth time was for him. He wore a navy sweater that made his eyes look like late evening. The conversation drifted from Keats to honesty to the terrible exactness of wanting something you had promised not to touch. He said it like a fact about someone else. I nodded like it wasn't about me. It was raining when we reached the door, the kind of rain that turns streets into blurred mirrors. He offered the umbrella. I said no, then yes, then no again, like indecision could undo desire. He didn't insist. He opened it over my head and walked beside me to the library colonnade anyway, one shoulder in the rain. "Do you believe in inevitability?" he asked, under stone and water and the drumming of something unnamed. "I believe we name things inevitable when we're afraid of admitting we chose them," I said. He looked away. "Possibly." We stopped at the third column from the entrance. He didn't step closer. He didn't step away. That was the first line he crossed. He let the moment exist. And I let it live in me. The sign on his door said office hours, 2:04 p.m. The clock inside said 6:13. A heavy storm had wrung the campus out by then. The hallways smelled like old books and damp wool. He was alone, half the room lit, the other half shadow, a spilled chiaroscuro over shelves that tried and failed to look unstudied. A photograph of a shoreline faced inward, away from the door, as if he owed privacy to a piece of coast. "I brought your essay," I said, holding out pages that felt hotter than they should. "And I brought your marginalia," he said, lifting my annotated copy of Jane Eyre with a wry smile. "It's more honest than most people let themselves be." "I'm less interesting when I'm not hiding behind a book," I said, regretting it on the exhale. He leaned back, contemplative. "I don't think you hide, I think you practice." We talked about narrative distance, then about sincerity, then about how it was getting late and he should let me go. Neither of us moved. If temptation has a sound, it is the soft click of a pen set deliberately on a desk so both hands are empty. He gestured toward the window. "The rain's eased," he said. "So has everything else," I said before I could stop myself. He stood, he was careful with his height, cautious not to make space feel smaller. "Mara." He said my name like a warning. "I know," I said, "we won't." He nodded, relief and disappointment briefly shaking hands in his eyes. "Good," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. A crash of thunder somewhere beyond the humanities quad rattled the window, and the building went dark for 3 seconds. The emergency lights hummed and flickered to life. When the fluorescence steadied, so did our restraint. He stepped around the desk, keeping an honest distance. "Walk you out." We reached the stairwell and paused on the landing between floors, where the light doesn't quite commit. He took the step above mine so our eyes met level. "I shouldn't," he started. "You don't," I interrupted, and the grammar of that was wrong but the honesty was right. He smiled, torn and tired. "Go home, Mara." I'm already taking you with me, I said, and left before the truth could scorch the air. The department ran a winter reading, 3 poets, a panel, a reception that smelled like clementines and spiked cider. I wore black because it made me braver. He wore charcoal because it looks like choice masquerading as chance. He introduced the visiting poet with reverence, but his voice betrayed something like longing when he read a line about the one door you never open twice. When he looked up after the last stanza, his gaze grazed me. No, it paused, and I felt it settle like a hand just above skin without touching. At the reception, he avoided me with the precision of a man who had mapped the room around a single danger. I avoided him with the precision of a woman who had learned how to disappear in plain sight. Which lasted until Professor Irina Malkov, a colleague known for mercilessly loving the truth, introduced us to a donor whose laughter cracked like ice in a glass. "This is Mara," Irina said to the donor. "Brilliant mind, spine like a lighthouse in a storm. And this is Adrian," she added to me, turning the full blade of her gaze toward him. "The man who thinks he can outrun weather." It felt like a blessing and a warning tied to the same string. Later, on the terrace, snow whispered down like the sky had finally agreed to hush. He stepped out, gloveless, breath painting the dark. "You shouldn't be out here," he said softly. "Neither should you." He laughed once, quietly, and pressed his fingers to his temple as if the thought were a headache. "You know what the worst part is?" "That there's a right thing," I said, "and it doesn't feel like the kind thing." "Exactly," he said, looking relieved and ruined at once. "And I keep hoping the feeling will make the right thing wrong." "And I keep hoping the right thing will make the feeling stop," I said. We stared at the brick parapet instead of each other. "There's a coast in Maine," he said after a moment. "When the fog rolls in, shorelines become an argument. You think you're walking straight along the water, but you're angled toward the sea. Maybe the point isn't to fight the fog," I said. "Maybe it's to put a rope in the ground and hold." He watched my breath ribbon in the air. "Promise me we'll hold." "I promise," I said, and wished I didn't mean it. Rumors don't need facts. They only need a witness with hunger and a hallway with poor acoustics. I found out from a friend who found out from a TA who found out from a graduate student who didn't even know my last name. An anonymous complaint had been filed with the department about inappropriate closeness and boundary ambiguity. Words that were accurate without evidence. Words that were a blade with no blood yet. He didn't cancel class. He didn't mention it. He lectured on narrative reliability and how the teller shapes the told until it becomes unrecognizable to itself. I took notes like I could trap his voice between margins. When I handed in my paper, he didn't touch my fingers. It felt like betrayal. It felt like mercy. A week later, Irina stopped me in the hall. "Stay measured," she said, which is what people say when they know a storm is already inside you. "And stay off the internet." "I haven't," I started. Her eyebrow said, "Don't insult me. Anyone who wants a scandal will use your silence as confession and your words as kindling. Practice vanishing." He asked me to come by his office at 5. When I arrived, the door was half closed. He didn't look like a man under investigation. He looked like a man who had rehearsed losing. "They'll ask if we've had contact outside of class," he said evenly. "We haven't," I said. "Truth is a scalpel and a refuge. They'll ask if I've favored you." "You've challenged me," I said. "Which is how I know you didn't." He nodded, jaw tight. "If they ask you how you feel." "They won't," I said, "because that would make this real." He swallowed, throat working around a thought that didn't want to be said. "I'm going to suggest you transfer to another section." The room tilted. "No. It protects you." "It abandons me," I said, "and it punishes me for what we didn't do." "It punishes me for not making it easier," he said, breaking on the last word. We were very careful then, careful with silence, careful with breath. He stepped back from the desk. "Mara, I need you to let me protect you even if it makes you hate me." "I won't hate you," I said. "I'll just memorize this shape of you and pretend I never knew the other one." I moved sections. He didn't watch me go. It was the kindest thing he did. The new professor was capable and kind and completely wrong for my grief. I raised my hand less. I wrote more. I walked the long way home along the creek where ice made promises it couldn't keep. At night, I read anything that hurt cleanly, poems that ended on a breath, essays with spines like bridges. He kept his distance, which is to say, he built a distance and lived inside it like a room with no windows. But distance is a liar. It tells you you're safe while it sells your name to memory. The investigation concluded with a sentence that neither sentenced nor absolved. No evidence of misconduct. Recommendations include additional boundary training. Words that make a person into policy. Words that resolve nothing. After, he sent an email to the class. Thank you for your patience during a challenging time. Back to work. I read it 32 times and hated everyone. Irina found me in the library stacks and set a book in front of me without preamble. A slim volume about how writers survive impossible truths without losing their kindness. Learn this, she said, then choose. 2 nights later, I returned to the colonnade where he had once shared an umbrella with me and said the quiet part of wanting out loud. Snow rethreaded the air. He arrived like a man who had already chosen to leave early. You shouldn't have asked me to come, he said. And you shouldn't have come, I said. We're even. He almost smiled. What do you want, Mara? I want to know if you meant it, I said. The promise to hold. He closed his eyes, jaw clenched as if the truth had a taste. I did. And now? He opened his eyes. Now I hold by letting go. You're not holding, I said. You're looking away. He stepped back as if the air between us were a cliff's edge. If I touch you, I can't be who this job needs me to be. And if you don't, I said, I can't be who I promised myself I'd become. We stood there in the bite of winter, two people orphaned by our better angels. Goodbye, Mara, he said, breaking the word into two smaller ones. Goodbye, Adrian, I said, and the name felt like a door closing in a house I'd built myself. Time doesn't heal. Time hands you a mirror and waits. I graduated with chords I didn't care about and a heart that had learned to carry weight without asking for help. I moved to a city where rain had different manners. I became the kind of editor who writes notes like blessings and cuts like a surgeon. I learned to sit with the ache until it became a room I knew how to leave. Months later, at a conference in Boston, I attended a panel on narrative ethics. He sat 3 rows ahead, with a ring of white at his temples like snow that had decided to stay. He didn't turn, I didn't fidget. When he asked the panel a question about duty and desire and the moral imagination, the room held its breath because some truths don't need context to feel like confession. After, in the corridor, he waited by a window that framed an indifferent sky. Mara. Adrian. Are you well? He asked. Yes, I said, and you? He nodded, then shook his head. I'm working on it. We stood there, two lives that had refused to rewrite themselves for a feeling that refused to be small. You were right, he said finally. About inevitability, about naming things. And you were right, I said. About holding. He smiled, grief making him beautiful. I held, he said, every day. So did I. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. He glanced at the badge around my neck and read the name of the magazine, now paying me to believe in sentences. You built the life, he said softly. You kept the line, I said. He breathed out. It still hurts. It should, I said. It means we didn't lie. He nodded. Be kind to the next impossible truth, he said. I'll try, I answered. He looked past me then, toward a future neither of us belonged to. Goodbye, Mara. Goodbye, I said, and this time it felt like a benediction rather than a blade. Like a benediction rather than a blade.